Oh, Father dear, I oft times hear you speak of Erin's eye.
One of the things that happened here in the chaos of the famine, and more than one occasion, is people were buried alive. If you were cold on the side of the road, you were picked up in a death cart and brought over here to these pits. And one very famous survivor lived to tell the tale. His name was Tom Guerin. And the story is, Tom died, or they thought he died, in 1848 when he was just 3 years of age, a little boy. And he was brought over here to the pits and tumbled into the pits with the other dead bodies. And as they were straightening out the bodies and covering them with straw and trying to make more space, they were hitting them with a shovel. And they hit Tom on the legs with the shovel, and he gave out a little cry, and they realised he was alive. And they took him out, and he lived until 1910. But his knees or his hips were damaged. Probably his knees, and he was, in his own words, a cripple. So post-famine Skibbereen wasn't much better than during the famine, so poor Tom had no way of earning his own living. So he did what many poor people did at the time. He'd go into the workhouse to survive the winter, a process called wintering, and then for the summer he'd travel around all the towns and villages as a mendicant, as a beggar. But in today's terms, he had a unique selling proposition as the man who'd risen from the dead, and boy did he use it. He was a wonderful character. And he was very well remembered around. I've met many people who remember him, including my own grandmother, who met him at Bantry Fair. One verse of one of his poems remains. It started with, "I'm the poet, I'm the genius. I rose from the dead in the year 48, when a grave by the abbey had near been my fate. Since then, for subsistence, I've done all my best, though one shoe points east and the other points west."
And that's the cruel reason why I left old Skibbereen. Oh, Father dear, I oft times hear you speak of Erin's eye.
Skibbereen was one of the worst affected areas during the Great Irish Famine, and we know from contemporary accounts that the Windmill Lane here was one of the most devastated areas. Skibbereen was a union town. There was a soup kitchen and a workhouse here, so people from the surrounding area crowded into town, and we know that a lot of them ended up in places like Windmill Lane, living in old broken down houses and houses that had been abandoned by other families. In December 1846, we know that there were 23 one-roomed houses in Windmill Lane, and that in that month 18 people died in that lane alone.
We have a report from December 1846 about the widow Lynch who lived in one of the houses here in Windmill Lane.
This poor woman came into town about 4 months ago from a neighbouring village with 4 children dependent on her, and located herself in a miserable little hut in the town.
Soon after she settled in Windmill Lane, she lost her first child to famine fever, followed shortly afterwards by a second. Then she and her third child also fell ill with fever.
She crawled from her sick bed and staggered down to the town. She dropped on that day on the street, and she died on Friday last in her hovel.
There is no trace today of the widow Lynch and her children, or any of the others who lived and died on the Windmill Rock during the Great Famine, other than these intriguing structures cut into the rock face. These were once the foundations of small houses that we know were lived in during the 19th century, including famine times. 3 of them were excavated by Professor Stephen Brighton and his team from the University of Maryland in 2015. They found different types of ware, coins, and even children's toys. This area was gradually abandoned, and a photo from the late 19th century shows only a few houses left on the Windmill Rock. Today, the Windmill Rock is used as a recreational area by the people of Skibbereen. But those who suffered and died there during Ireland's Great Hunger are not forgotten.
She never rose but passed away from life to mortal dream, and found a quiet grave, my boy, in dear old Skibbereen.